One autumn night in Sudbury town, across the meadows, bare and brown, the windows of the Wayside Inn gleamed red, with firelight through the leaves of woodbine, hanging from the eaves, their crimson curtains rent and thin.
As ancient is this hostelry as any in the land may be, built in the old colonial day when men lived in a grander way, with ampler hospitality, a kind of old hobgoblin hall, now somewhat fallen to decay, with weather stains upon the wall, and stairways worn, and crazy doors, and creaking and uneven floors, and chimneys huge, and tiled and tall.
A region of repose, it seems, a place of slumber and of dreams, remote among the wooded hills, for there no noisy railway speeds, its torch rays scattering smoke and gleeds. But noon and night the panting teams stop under the great oaks that throw tangles of light and shade below on roofs and doors and window sills. Across the road the barns display their lines of stalls, their mows of hay. Through the wide doors the breezes blow, the wattled cocks strut to and fro, and half effaced by rain and shine, the red horse prances on the sign. Round this old-fashioned quaint abode deep silence reigned, save when a gust went rushing down the county road, and skeletons of leaves and dust, a moment quickened by its breath, shuddered and danced their dance of death. And through the ancient oaks o'erhead, mysterious voices moaned and fled.
But from the parlor of the inn, a pleasant murmur smote the ear, like water rushing through a weir, oft interrupted by the din of laughter and of loud applause, and in each intervening pause, the music of a violin. The firelight, shedding over all the splendor of its ruddy glow, filled the whole parlor large and low. It gleamed on wainscot and on wall. It touched with more than wonted grace fair Princess Mary's pictured face. It bronzed the rafters overhead. On the old spinet's ivory keys, it played inaudible melodies. It crowned the somber clock with flame, the hands, the hours, the maker's name, and painted with a livelier red the landlord's coat of arms again. And flashing on the window pane, emblazoned with its light and shade, the jovial rhymes that still remain, writ near a century ago by the great Major Molyneux, whom Hawthorne has immortal made.
Before the blazing fire of wood, erect the rapt musician stood, and ever and anon he bent his head upon his instrument, and seemed to listen till he caught confessions of its secret thought, the joy, the triumph, the lament, the exultation, and the pain. Then, by the magic of his art, he soothed the throbbings of its heart and lulled it into peace again.
Around the fireside, at their ease, there sat a group of friends, entranced with the delicious melodies, who from the far-off noisy town had to the Wayside Inn come down, to rest beneath its old oak trees. The firelight on their faces glanced, their shadows on the wainscot danced, and though of different lands and speech, each had his tale to tell, and each was anxious to be pleased and please. And while the sweet musician plays, let me in outline sketch them all, perchance uncouthly, as the blaze, with its uncertain touch portrays their shadowy semblance on the wall.
But first the landlord will I trace, grave in his aspect and attire, a man of ancient pedigree, a justice of the peace was he, known in all Sudbury as the squire. Proud was he of his name and race, of old Sir William and Sir Hugh, and in the parlour, full in view, his coat of arms, well framed and glazed, upon the wall in colours blazed. He beareth gules upon his shield, a chevron argent in the field, with 3 wolf's heads, and for the crest, a wyvern part per pale addressed, upon a helmet barred. Below, the scroll reads, by the name of Howe. And over this, no longer bright, though glimmering with a latent light, was hung the sword his grandsire bore in the rebellious days of yore, down there at Concord in the fight.
A youth was there, of quiet ways, a student of old books and days, to whom all tongues and lands were known, and yet a lover of his own, with many a social virtue graced, and yet a friend of solitude. A man of such a genial mood, the heart of all things he embraced, and yet of such fastidious taste, he never found the best too good. Books were his passion and delight, and in his upper room at home stood many a rare and sumptuous tome, in vellum bound with gold bedight, great volumes garmented in white, recalling Florence, Pisa, Rome. He loved the twilight that surrounds the borderland of old romance, where glitter hauberk, helm and lance, and banner waves and trumpet sounds, and ladies ride with hawk on wrist, and mighty warriors sweep along, magnified by the purple mist, the dusk of centuries and of song. The chronicles of Charlemagne, of Merlin and the Morte d'Arthur, mingled together in his brain with tales of Floris and Blanchefleur, Sir Ferimbras, Sir Eglamour, Sir Lancelot, Sir Morgador, Sir Guy, Sir Bevis, and Sir Gawain.
A young Sicilian, too, was there. In sight of Etna, born and bred, some breath of its volcanic air was glowing in his heart and brain. And being rebellious to his liege after Palermo's fatal siege, across the western seas he fled in good King Bomba's happy reign. His face was like a summer night, all flooded with a dusky light. His hands were small, his teeth shone white as seashells when he smiled or spoke, his sinews supple and strong as oak. Clean-shaven was he as a priest, who at the mass on Sunday sings, save that upon his upper lip, his beard a good palm's length at least, level and pointed at the tip, shot sideways like a swallow's wings. The poets read he o'er, and most of all the immortal four of Italy, and next to those the storytelling bard of prose, who wrote the joyous Tuscan tales of the Decameron, that make Fiesole's green hills and vales remembered for Boccaccio's sake. Much too of music was his thought, the melodies and measures fraught with sunshine and the open air, of vineyards and the singing sea of his beloved Sicily. And much it pleased him to peruse the songs of the Sicilian muse, bucolic songs by Mealy sung in the familiar peasant tongue, that made men say, behold once more the pitying gods to earth restore, Theocritus of Syracuse.
A Spanish Jew from Alicante, with aspect grand and grave, was there, vendor of silks and fabrics rare, and adder of rose from the Levant. Like an old patriarch he appeared, Abraham or Isaac, or at least some later prophet or high priest, with lustrous eyes and olive skin, and wildly tossed from cheeks and chin the tumbling cataract of his beard. His garments breathed a spicy scent of cinnamon and sandal blent, like the soft aromatic gales that meet the mariner who sails through the Moluccas and the seas that wash the shores of Celebes. All stories that recorded are by Pierre Alphonse he knew by heart, and it was rumored he could say the parables of Sandabar and all the fables of Pilpay, or if not all, the greater part. Well versed was he in Hebrew books, Talmud and Targum, and the lore of Kabbalah, and evermore. There was a mystery in his looks. His eyes seemed gazing far away, as if in vision or in trance. He heard the solemn sackbut play and saw the Jewish maidens dance.
A theologian from the School of Cambridge on the Charles was there. Skillful alike with tongue and pen, he preached to all men everywhere the gospel of the golden rule, the new commandment given to men. Thinking the deed and not the creed would help us in our utmost need. With reverent feet the earth he trod, nor banished nature from his plan, but studied still with deep research to build the universal church, lofty as in the love of God, and ample as the wants of man.
A poet, too, was there, whose verse was tender, musical, and terse. The inspiration, the delight, the gleam, the glory, the swift flight of thoughts so sudden that they seem the revelations of a dream. All these were his, but with them came no envy of another's fame. He did not find his sleep less sweet for music in some neighboring street, nor rustling here in every breeze the laurels of Miltiades. Honor and blessings on his head while living, good report when dead. Who not too eager for renown accepts, but does not clutch the crown.
Last the musician as he stood, illumined by that fire of wood, fair-haired, blue-eyed, his aspect blithe, his figure tall and straight and lithe, and every feature of his face revealing his Norwegian race. A radiance streaming from within, around his eyes and forehead beamed, the angel with the violin, painted by Raphael he seemed. He lived in that ideal world whose language is not speech but song, around him evermore the throng of elves and sprites their dances whirled, the Stromkarl sang, the cataract hurled its headlong waters from the height, and mingled in the wild delight the scream of seabirds in their flight, the rumor of the forest trees, the plunge of the implacable seas, the tumult of the wind at night. Voices of eld like trumpets blowing, old ballads and wild melodies, through mist and darkness pouring forth, like a Livigar's river flowing out of the glaciers of the north.
The instrument on which he played was in Cremona's workshops made by a great master of the past, ere yet was lost the art divine, fashioned of maple and of pine, that in Tyrolean forests vast had rocked and wrestled with the blast. Exquisite was it in design, perfect in each minutest part, a marvel of the lutist's art. And in its hollow chamber thus the maker from whose hands it came had written his unrivaled name, Antonius Stradivarius.
And when he played, the atmosphere was filled with magic, and the ear caught echoes of that harp of gold, whose music had so weird a sound, the hunted stag forgot to bound. The leaping rivulet backward rolled, the birds came down from bush and tree, the dead came from beneath the sea, the maiden to the harper's knee.
The music ceased, the applause was loud, the pleased musician smiled and bowed. The wood fire clapped its hands of flame, the shadows of the wainscot stirred. From the harpsichord there came a ghostly murmur of acclaim, the sound that sent down at night by birds of passage in their flight, from the remotest distance heard.
Then silence followed. Then began a clamour for the landlord's tale. The story promised them of old, they said, but always left untold. And though he, a bashful man, and all his courage seemed to fail, finding excuse of no avail, yielded, and thus the story ran.